In today's story, we meet Charlie, a determined single mother of triplets who faces unimaginable challenges after being abandoned by the man she thought loved her, a man whose obsession with wealth and status shattered their lives. Now he returns, desperate for a second chance, but can he earn her forgiveness and step up as a father? Or has Charlie's resilience made her strong enough to build a new life on her own? Join us on this emotional journey of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of family. Don't miss a moment. Subscribe for more heartwarming stories like this, and let us know in the comments. Can broken trust ever be truly mended? Now let's dive in. Charlotte "Charlie" Evans had come to know the Prescott mansion almost as well as the back of her hand. Its grandiose halls, filled with elaborate decorations and polished marble floors, were now etched in her memory after 5 years as a housemaid. Despite the opulence around her, her life was simple, uncomplicated but hard-working. Charlie was 28, self-made in every way. Growing up in foster care had instilled an independence that few understood, and her pride came not from wealth but from resilience. For her, work was more than survival. It was her way of proving she could withstand life's blows. Recently, however, her life had been anything but straightforward. Charlie had developed a quiet relationship with James Prescott, the 35-year-old heir to the Prescott estate and its fortune. To the world, James was every bit the polished, driven businessman, charming and assertive with an air of quiet authority. But to Charlie, he was someone else, a man who had shared intimate moments of vulnerability and passion, enough to convince her there was something genuine between them. These stolen moments were their secret, hidden from everyone, especially from his fiancée, Lily Donahue. James's relationship with Lily Donahue was as much a power move as it was romantic. Lily was the very definition of a high-society socialite, ambitious, polished, and endlessly charming when it suited her needs. She was deeply invested in preserving her family's status and wealth, and James offered her just that. Together, they were the perfect image of high-society power, a couple of influence and refinement. Despite their idealized public image, Charlie could see the distance between James and Lily's affections. Lily cared for James's wealth and family name as much as she cared for him. Their engagement was a social alliance rather than a relationship founded on love. But while Charlie understood this arrangement, it didn't stop her from feeling a pang of jealousy each time she saw them together. She kept this emotion to herself, swallowing her feelings in silence, telling herself she was foolish to think someone like James could truly be hers. The Prescott mansion was always bustling with activities, events, charity functions, and family gatherings that required meticulous preparation and adherence to detail. In recent months, however, James had grown strangely distant. He still shared moments with Charlie, but the warmth and closeness between them had become increasingly strained, his demeanor cold and cautious. It was as if he was building a wall between them, a barrier she couldn't understand or penetrate. One evening, James summoned Charlie to his study under the pretense of work, but she could tell something deeper lingered beneath the surface. The walls, normally decorated with rich, leather-bound books and expensive paintings, felt claustrophobic as she entered. Her heart pounded as she approached his desk, sensing the tension in the air. James was facing away from her, looking out the large window that overlooked the expansive Prescott Gardens, the place where they had often met in secret. "Charlie," James started, his tone unnervingly formal. "We need to talk." The words made her heart sink. She felt a twist of anxiety as she waited for him to continue, unsure if she even wanted to hear what he had to say. "What's wrong, James?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with a hint of worry. James turned to face her, his expression hard and unreadable. Whatever this is between us, it needs to end," he stated coldly, as if severing a business deal. Charlie blinked, stunned by his sudden change in tone. "End? James, I thought?" Her voice trailed off, realizing how foolish she must have sounded. "It was a mistake," he continued, interrupting her. "I let it go on for too long, and it shouldn't have happened. You know as well as I do that we come from different worlds." Each word felt like a lash, sharp and painful. She stood frozen, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger, betrayal, and humiliation. How could he disregard everything they'd shared with such indifference? Different worlds? You didn't seem to care about that before, she said, her voice low but filled with emotion. This is about Lily, isn't it? James didn't respond right away, his silence an answer in itself. The cold mask he wore was firmly in place, revealing no vulnerability, only resolve. Lily is part of my world, Charlie, he finally said, his voice devoid of warmth. A world you don't belong in. Feeling the finality of his words, Charlie forced herself to keep her composure. But every fiber of her being wanted to scream, to make him see how deeply he was hurting her. James's words had shattered the illusion she had allowed herself to believe. That perhaps, despite their differences, he saw her as more than a fleeting amusement. In her heart she'd believed they had something real, something special. And his callous rejection was a blow she hadn't anticipated. With a shaky breath, she held back her tears, mustering every ounce of dignity she had left. I understand, she whispered, her voice strained. Goodbye, James. She turned and left the study, feeling the weight of heartbreak pressing down on her as she walked through the halls she had come to know so well, realizing they would soon be nothing more than memories. The next morning, Charlie received an official notice from the Prescott household manager, informing her that her employment had been terminated effective immediately. There was no severance beyond a week's pay, an arrangement likely orchestrated by Lily herself. Humiliated and without a job, Charlie gathered her belongings from her small room in the servants' quarters, memories flooding her as she packed. Her pride stung, but she kept her head held high, refusing to let her pain be seen by the others who worked there. As she took one last look at the estate before leaving, a new resolve stirred within her. She had lost everything familiar, yes, but she would start over. She had done it before, and she would do it again. Charlie found herself standing outside the Prescott estate with her belongings in a single worn suitcase. The world felt colder now, harsher, and she had no plan, no savings, and nowhere to go. Her pride wouldn't let her return to her small network of friends with the story of a love gone awry. It was too painful, too fresh. Over the next few days, Charlie took refuge in a cramped, low-rent motel, stretching her limited funds for as long as possible. She applied for jobs, but her modest qualifications and the competitive job market left her with little hope. Each morning, she woke with a sinking dread, knowing she'd have to fight for a path forward. One evening, sitting on the motel's frayed bedspread, Charlie replayed the breakup in her mind, the sharpness of James's words, his cold expression. She struggled to accept that the man she had grown to love could treat her with such indifference. This can't be the end for me, she whispered to herself. I've rebuilt my life before, and I'll do it again. I don't need him, and I don't need anyone. Determined to regain control of her life, Charlie contacted a few temp agencies and accepted odd cleaning jobs. From scrubbing floors to managing heavy-duty tasks most people wouldn't take on. Though the pay barely covered her motel costs, she endured it, clinging to a sense of purpose in each small success. Weeks passed, and life started to settle into a rhythm of struggle, but with a hint of hope that she could, in time, find her footing. Then, one morning, Charlie woke with a bout of dizziness, followed by a wave of nausea that left her unable to finish her breakfast. She dismissed it as stress, the toll of exhaustion and worry, but as the days passed, her symptoms only worsened. Finally, she visited a local clinic, expecting nothing more than a routine checkup. The doctor, however, delivered news that turned her world upside down. Mrs. Evans, congratulations. You're pregnant, he announced. In fact, you're expecting triplets. The words hit her like a tidal wave, and the room seemed to spin as she absorbed their meaning. She was carrying not one but 3 babies, James's children. For a moment she was overwhelmed, torn between joy and terror. I didn't know, she stammered, clutching the edge of the exam table. Triplets? Are they healthy? The doctor nodded, his expression serious. For now, yes, but triplet pregnancies can be risky, especially given your recent lifestyle stresses. I'd recommend rest, a balanced diet, and regular checkups. Charlie left the clinic in a daze, the enormity of her situation pressing down on her. Raising one child on her own had seemed difficult. Raising 3 felt impossible. As Charlie returned to the motel, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. She knew that, as the father, James had a responsibility, but she couldn't bring herself to contact him. The sting of his last words lingered in her heart, and she knew he would likely dismiss her claims. Seeing her children as another mistake, he had no interest in acknowledging. "No," she whispered fiercely to herself. "I will not rely on him. I will make it work on my own, for me and for these babies. They'll be loved and they'll be safe, even if I have to do it alone." Charlie's resolve hardened. She would do whatever it took to provide a future for her children. A future free from the coldness and rejection she had experienced. In the days that followed, Charlie moved out of the motel and searched for a more permanent, affordable place. Her money was dwindling and every dollar had to stretch. Finally, through a local shelter, she was introduced to Margaret Collins, a retired schoolteacher who rented out a small room in her modest home to women in need. Margaret was in her late 60s, kind-hearted but perceptive. From the first moment they met, Margaret sensed that Charlie carried a heavy burden. She welcomed Charlie into her home with warmth and a promise of safety. "Stay as long as you need, dear," Margaret said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've been through a lot, I can tell. Don't worry about the rent until you're on your feet." Grateful for this small grace, Charlie settled in, finding comfort in the simple acts of kindness Margaret extended. She began taking on cleaning jobs in the neighborhood, building a small network of clients who admired her reliability and dedication. Despite Margaret's kindness, the reality of her financial situation weighed heavily on Charlie. Each job barely covered basic necessities, and her pregnancy brought new challenges. Some days, her growing belly made it difficult to work, the physical toll leaving her exhausted. One afternoon, after finishing a long day scrubbing floors, Charlie sat down with Margaret, feeling more defeated than ever. Her hands trembled as she recounted her struggles, from the pregnancy to her fears for the future. "I can't keep up," she admitted, voice breaking. "I want to give my children the world, but I can barely keep myself afloat." Margaret reached across the table, clasping Charlie's hand with a reassuring grip. "You're stronger than you know, Charlie. Life doesn't always play fair, but it's people like you who make it through. You're going to be a wonderful mother, no matter how hard it gets." Months passed, and Charlie found herself adapting to life at Margaret's home. Despite her limited income, she was grateful for the small comforts of a safe roof, a warm bed, and Margaret's unwavering support. She continued her cleaning jobs, her growing belly a constant reminder of the 3 lives she now carried. Though the financial strain remained, her resolve had only strengthened. With each passing week, Charlie experienced the wonders and challenges of pregnancy. Small things brought her joy, like feeling her baby's kick for the first time. In these moments, she realized that her journey, though difficult, held a purpose far greater than herself. She vowed to raise her children with love, dignity, and strength, values she had fought so hard to uphold. However, the physical toll of carrying triplets began to wear on her. Her energy waned, and some nights the back pain kept her awake. Despite the growing discomfort, Charlie couldn't afford to stop working. She needed every dollar she could earn to prepare for the baby's arrival. One afternoon, Charlie's exhaustion reached a peak. While cleaning a client's home, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness and clutched a nearby table to steady herself. Her vision blurred momentarily, and she instinctively wrapped a hand around her belly, as if shielding her unborn children from the strain of her work. Sensing something was wrong, she left early and made her way to the clinic. The doctor ran a series of tests and advised her to rest more and avoid strenuous work. "You're carrying 3 babies, Ms. Evans. This pregnancy is considered high risk, especially given your circumstances," the doctor explained. "You need regular prenatal care, a nutritious diet, and rest. These babies need you healthy and strong." But rest was a luxury Charlie couldn't afford. Her finances were barely enough to cover her most basic needs, let alone medical bills and the expenses of raising children. Still, the doctor's warning weighed heavily on her mind. She needed a new plan, something that would allow her to sustain herself while preparing for the challenges of motherhood. That evening, Charlie sat at the small kitchen table in Margaret's home, lost in thought. The responsibilities awaiting her felt overwhelming, but each time she considered giving up, She thought of her unborn children and the life she wanted to give them. She pictured their tiny faces, imagined their laughter, and held on to the hope of one day building a life they could be proud of. "Charlie?" Margaret's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Charlie looked up to see Margaret standing in the doorway, her expression filled with gentle concern. "I know things feel impossible right now," Margaret said, her voice soft. "But you're not alone. You have people who care about you, who want to help." Tears welled up in Charlie's eyes as she realized the truth in Margaret's words. The support of even one person meant the world. She took Margaret's hand, feeling the warmth of friendship and support, and allowed herself to hope that somehow she would make it through this. Over the next few weeks, Margaret offered more than just a place to stay. She introduced Charlie to her church community, where a few members provided baby supplies, diapers, tiny clothes, blankets. Each gift felt like a lifeline, a tangible reminder that there were people who cared. One evening, Margaret handed Charlie a small envelope. "It's not much," she said, her eyes kind but resolute. "But it's a start. Use this for whatever you need, Charlie." Inside the envelope was a modest sum of money that Margaret had quietly saved for months. Tears filled Charlie's eyes, but Margaret simply squeezed her shoulder. "You've been so strong, Charlie. But remember, sometimes strength means accepting help." As Charlie entered her third trimester, her attachment to her unborn children deepened. She spoke to them often, telling them stories of her past, sharing her dreams for the future, and promising to be the best mother she could. In the quiet hours of the night, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. "Your lives will be better," she whispered, her hands resting on her belly. "I'll make sure of it." Yet despite her resolve, financial challenges still haunted her. Margaret's support had been a blessing, but she knew it couldn't cover everything. Every night, she lay awake, wondering how she would manage once the babies arrived. The strain finally caught up with Charlie one stormy evening. She returned from work, rain-soaked and exhausted, her feet swollen and her back aching from hours of scrubbing floors. She dropped her small earnings on the table and counted the bills, each dollar stretched to the limit. Her heart ached with the realization that, even with all her efforts, it still wouldn't be enough. Feeling the weight of her struggles, she sank to her knees, hands trembling as she clutched the table's edge. The vulnerability of the moment pressed down on her, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry. Margaret found her there, her gentle voice breaking through the storm of Charlie's emotions. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered, pulling Charlie into an embrace. "You have us. We'll find a way." The words settled over Charlie like a balm, soothing her fears, if only temporarily. She knew Margaret was right. She couldn't face this battle alone. She needed support, not only for her children but for herself. As Charlie's pregnancy continued, the toll on her body became increasingly severe. Each day brought new aches, leaving her breathless and exhausted. She now struggled to walk for long periods and found herself often dizzy and unsteady, forcing her to cut back on cleaning jobs. Her income was already stretched thin, and every reduction felt like another step closer to a breaking point. One evening, after a grueling day, she returned to Margaret's home, her face pale and her hands trembling. Margaret noticed and urged her to sit down. "You need to rest, Charlie," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "Pushing yourself like this isn't safe for you or the babies." Charlie knew Margaret was right, but resting was a luxury she couldn't afford. "If I stop, we'll have nothing," she replied quietly, pressing a hand to her swollen belly. "But I don't know how much more I can take." Despite her determination, Charlie knew her strength was waning, and the fear of her situation weighed heavily on her. One rainy night, Charlie lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as 1,000 worries ran through her mind. She wondered if she could provide for 3 children on her own, if her strength would hold out long enough to bring them into the world safely. Every uncertainty gnawed at her, amplifying her exhaustion and fear. Unable to hold back any longer, she broke down, silent tears streaming down her face. Her whispered thoughts tumbled out, desperate and raw. "I just want to give them a good life. Is that too much to ask?" Her quiet sobs filled the room, and for the first time she felt utterly defeated. It was a moment of vulnerability that felt both necessary and terrifying. She needed a way forward, but it seemed impossible to find one. The next morning, Margaret found her looking weary and defeated. She sat down beside Charlie, offering her a warm cup of tea. "You know, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help," she said. "You don't have to carry this burden alone." Charlie nodded, though the weight of her struggles remained. It was a glimmer of hope, but she knew she needed to find her strength again. If not for herself, then for her babies. As her due date approached, Charlie's financial situation grew more dire. Hospital bills were accumulating faster than she could pay, and every expense reminded her of the steep climb ahead. Her small income wasn't enough, and the thought of her babies arriving into a world of debt filled her with dread. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived from the hospital regarding her outstanding bills. The words blurred as she read, her chest tightening with fear. They threatened to withhold essential prenatal care unless she could make a payment soon. The stark reality hit her hard. Without proper care, her babies could be at serious risk. Desperation clawed at her heart as she considered her options. She could reach out to James for support, but the thought was unbearable. She knew his indifference too well, and her pride refused to lean on someone who had so casually cast her aside. Seeing Charlie's despair, Margaret took action. She gathered members of her church community, explaining Charlie's situation and rallying support. The church had a modest fund set aside for families in need, and Margaret's request struck a chord with those who heard her plea. With a few donations, they managed to collect enough to cover some of Charlie's medical expenses. When Margaret presented her with the funds, Charlie was overcome with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the envelope tightly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Margaret's smile was warm. "We're in this together, Charlie. You have a family here." The kindness lifted a weight off her heart, if only temporarily. She felt a renewed resolve to press on, inspired by the support she had received. Charlie's determination was tested further when, one evening, a sudden sharp pain struck her lower abdomen, leaving her breathless and terrified. She clutched her stomach, feeling the intensity of the contractions, and immediately realized that something was wrong. Margaret, hearing her cry out, rushed to her side and quickly called an ambulance. "Hold on, Charlie," she said, her voice trembling with worry. "Help is on the way." In the ambulance, Charlie fought to remain conscious, each wave of pain more intense than the last. The paramedics worked quickly, monitoring her vitals and offering reassurances, but her mind was consumed with fear. She knew her babies were coming too soon, and the thought of losing them was unbearable. "Please," she whispered, clutching the paramedic's hand. "Save them. Save my babies." Upon arrival at the hospital, doctors rushed to stabilize her, but it was clear that the triplets were coming early. Charlie's condition was critical, and the doctors prepared her for an emergency delivery. She clung to the hope that her babies would survive, praying silently as the medical team worked. After hours of intense labor, Charlie's triplets were born, small and fragile, their tiny bodies hooked up to life support machines in the neonatal intensive care unit. Though they were alive, their condition was precarious, and the doctors cautioned Charlie that the coming weeks would be critical for their survival. Charlie was physically and emotionally drained, but her heart swelled with fierce love as she looked at her children through the glass of the NICU. They were fighters, just like her, and she vowed to stay by their side every step of the way. Margaret visited her in the hospital, offering comfort and bringing small gifts from the church community. "They're beautiful, Charlie," she whispered, her eyes misty with emotion. "And they're lucky to have you as their mother." Charlie smiled weakly, grateful for the support. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but seeing her babies gave her a newfound strength. They were her purpose, her reason to keep fighting, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks, and Charlie spent every moment she could by her babies' sides, watching their tiny bodies struggle for each breath. The NICU became her second home, a place filled with hope and despair in equal measure. She learned the nurses' names, memorized the sounds of the machines, and celebrated every small victory, no matter how minor. One night, while holding her smallest baby's hand through the incubator's opening, Charlie felt a wave of gratitude. She had nearly lost them, yet here they were, fighting to live. It was a reminder that, no matter how difficult things seemed, there was always hope. But the financial strain was relentless. Hospital bills continued to mount, and Charlie's small savings were quickly depleted. Her faith wavered as she worried about how she would provide for her children once they left the hospital. Desperate, Charlie decided to look for work at the hospital to earn whatever she could while staying close to her children. She approached the hospital's administrator and, with humility, asked if they had any positions available. To her relief, they offered her a part-time cleaning job, allowing her to earn a small income and stay near her babies. Though the work was exhausting, Charlie took it gratefully, pouring her heart into each task. She scrubbed floors, cleaned patient rooms, and sanitized equipment, all while keeping her children at the forefront of her mind. Her love for them fueled her determination, giving her the strength to endure each long shift. Her co-workers admired her resilience, many unaware of the hardships she faced. Some would bring her small snacks or offer to cover her shift, gestures that reminded her she wasn't alone. One afternoon, while working her cleaning shift at the hospital, Charlie overheard a group of nurses chatting nearby. They were gossiping about a grand wedding taking place at the Prescott family estate that weekend. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard James's name. "It's the wedding of the year. James Prescott is finally marrying that high society Lily. Can you imagine?" one nurse said excitedly. Charlie's hands trembled as she absorbed the news. She had known that James and Lily's engagement was still intact, but she never expected the wedding to happen so soon. The thought of him moving on without a second thought for her, let alone the children, sent a pang of anger and hurt through her chest. As she made her way home that night, her mind raced. For months, she had shouldered the weight of their children's future alone. Now, as James prepared for a lavish ceremony, she was barely scraping by, desperate to pay hospital bills and hold her fragile family together. The decision came almost instinctively. She would confront him. He needed to know about his children. They deserved his acknowledgement, and she deserved to be heard. Charlie steeled herself, determined that this time she would not back down. The day of the wedding arrived. Charlie dressed simply, her clothes clean but modest, and with a sense of purpose, she made her way to the Prescott estate. The sight of the mansion, adorned with floral arrangements and shimmering decorations, brought memories rushing back. She was a different person the last time she was here. Optimistic, hopeful. Now she was a mother, fighting for the dignity and future of her children. As she approached the entrance, 2 guards stepped forward, blocking her path. "I need to speak with James Prescott," she said, her voice steady but unyielding. "He's expecting me." It was a lie, but she couldn't afford to be dismissed. After a tense exchange, one of the guards radioed inside. Moments later, she was granted access. She entered the grand hall, her footsteps echoing off the polished floors, as curious guests turned to look at the unfamiliar figure in their midst. Inside the opulent ceremony room, guests filled the pews, their eyes on James and Lily at the altar, the embodiment of high society elegance. Just as the priest began the vows, a murmur rippled through the crowd, heads turning to watch as Charlie entered, her face set with determination. James turned, his expression frozen in shock as he recognized her. Lily's eyes widened in disbelief, irritation flashing in her gaze. Ignoring the murmurs of disapproval, Charlie walked toward the altar, her voice breaking the silence. "James, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady yet laden with the pain she had carried all these months. Lily, clearly outraged, took a step forward, her voice tight with anger. "Who are you, and how dare you interrupt our wedding?" James, still speechless, looked between Charlie and the guests, visibly struggling to regain control. But Charlie stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. She had come for the truth, and she would not be silenced. Taking a deep breath, Charlie addressed James, her gaze unwavering. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, but I can't keep silent any longer. James, these past months have been a nightmare. Our children, the ones you abandoned, they're fighting to survive. You owe them the truth, and you owe them your support." The guests gasped as her words registered, shock and disbelief rippling through the crowd. Lily's face twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger, while James's expression turned pale. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Charlie held up the folder containing the DNA test results and medical records, her hands steady. "These are the medical records proving they're your children. Our children. I've been struggling to keep them alive, and you moved on without a second thought." She thrust the papers into his hands, her voice filled with all the anguish she had endured. "Look at them, James. They're real, and they're yours." The crowd was visibly uncomfortable, whispers filling the air as guests exchanged looks of judgment and curiosity. Lily, her face red with humiliation, turned to James, fury in her eyes. "Is this true? Did you have a child with her?" James's silence only confirmed it. His gaze dropped to the floor, guilt and shame clear in his expression. Lily's face contorted with anger, her voice rising as she addressed the guests. "This is a disgrace. I thought I was marrying a man of integrity, someone worthy of my family's name. But clearly I was wrong." With a final scathing look at James, Lily ripped the engagement ring off her finger and threw it to the ground, the metallic clink echoing in the tense silence. She turned on her heel and stormed out, her pride wounded beyond repair. As the guests watched, James looked back at Charlie, his eyes filled with regret. "Charlie, I had no idea." "If I had known—" Charlie's voice cut him off, resolute and firm. "But you did know, James. You knew I loved you, that we had something real. And still, you chose status and appearances over everything else, including your own children." Her words were a final blow, each one cutting deeper than the last. James had to confront the reality of his choices and the depth of pain he had caused. As he absorbed the weight of his actions, Charlie took a step back, her expression resolute. "I don't need anything from you, James. Not for myself. But your children deserve better, and I won't let them suffer because of your mistakes." The finality in her voice made it clear that she no longer held any illusions about him. Her mission was to ensure her children's future, not to seek reconciliation or forgiveness. As the tension reached its peak, the guests began to murmur, some standing to leave, others casting disapproving glances in James's direction. The grandeur of the wedding was now overshadowed by the raw truth of his actions. Margaret, who had quietly arrived in the back of the room to support Charlie, stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let's go, dear. You've done what you came here to do." Charlie nodded, her heart heavy yet resolute. She turned her back on the lavish hall, the chandeliers and floral arrangements fading from view as she left with Margaret. There was no place for her in that world, nor did she want one. As the guests dispersed and the once celebratory atmosphere dissipated, James stood alone in the grand hall, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been his perfect wedding. He was left with only the echo of Charlie's words, a harsh reminder of his selfishness. His mind raced with regret, replaying the moments he had pushed her away, the choices that had led him to this empty moment. He realized the emptiness of the life he had built, a life founded on status rather than love or integrity. For the first time, he understood the depth of the mistakes he had made. Slowly, he gathered the documents Charlie had left with him, reading the medical records that confirmed his children's existence. The reality of his responsibility settled over him, a weight he could no longer ignore. In the days following the disastrous wedding, James found himself haunted by guilt. Memories of Charlie, their time together, and the harsh words she spoke at the altar replayed in his mind. The realization that he had neglected his children and hurt someone he once loved consumed him. He couldn't ignore the pain he had caused, and the shame of knowing he'd chosen image over integrity was overwhelming. Determined to make amends, James set out to find a way to support Charlie and their children. He started by visiting the hospital, seeking guidance on the costs and care required for the triplets. As he learned about the medical needs, the expenses, and the challenges Charlie had faced alone, the weight of his responsibility became undeniable. James, unsure of how to approach Charlie directly, reached out to Margaret. He arrived at her modest home, humility replacing his once confident demeanor. Margaret greeted him warily, unsure of his intentions, but agreed to speak with him on the porch. "Margaret, I know I don't deserve it, but I need your help," James began, his voice filled with remorse. "I want to do right by Charlie and my children. I've hurt her, I know that, and I'm prepared to make amends." Margaret studied him for a moment before speaking. "It's not me you need to convince, James. Charlie's been through more than you can imagine. She's strong, but you broke her trust, and that's not something you can repair with words alone." James nodded, understanding the truth of her words. I'm willing to work for it. I want to be there for my children and support her however I can. She deserves that much, and so do they." Margaret softened, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Then be prepared for the hard road ahead, James. Trust and respect have to be earned, and it won't be easy." With Margaret's encouragement, James went to see Charlie. She agreed to meet him at a local park, a neutral ground that allowed her to maintain control over the situation. As she arrived with the triplets bundled up in a stroller, James felt a pang of emotion he hadn't anticipated. Seeing his children, their tiny faces, their bright eyes, made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. "Thank you for meeting me, Charlie," he began, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I let you down, I let our children down, and I regret every moment I let pride and fear take over." Charlie listened quietly, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond, but her silence encouraged James to continue. "I know I have no place in your life," he continued, "but I want to support the triplets. I've looked into their care, the medical bills. I'm prepared to cover all of it. I don't expect anything from you, Charlie. I just want to do right by them." Charlie took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to the babies, then back to James. "Support is the least you can offer, James. But this isn't about money. You abandoned us when we needed you most. How am I supposed to believe that you're here for the right reasons now?" "I understand," he replied, his voice breaking slightly. "All I can ask is that you let me prove myself. I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust as a co-parent, if nothing else." Over the next few weeks, James made a concerted effort to be involved in the children's lives. He visited regularly, bringing supplies and helping with household expenses. He even offered to cover medical bills directly with the hospital, relieving Charlie of the financial pressure that had weighed on her for so long. Despite his efforts, Charlie remained cautious. She allowed him to spend time with the children under her supervision, but kept an emotional distance. James understood her hesitance and remained patient, determined to prove that his commitment was genuine. The process was slow and fraught with tension, but both were dedicated to the well-being of their children. During a particularly long night when one of the babies fell ill, James stayed by Charlie's side, helping with late-night feedings and offering support. It was the first time Charlie saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, the man who was kind, caring, and invested in their children's lives. As the months passed, Charlie's life began to improve. Thanks to the financial support from James, she could reduce her work hours and focus more on the triplets' needs. Inspired by Margaret's encouragement, she began to revive her love of baking, preparing small treats to sell at local events. Her skill quickly caught on, and soon she was receiving more orders than she could handle. Margaret's support remained unwavering. She became like a grandmother to the triplets, offering Charlie a sense of family and stability that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Her home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the sounds of babies growing stronger every day. James continued to be a steady presence, his role as a father becoming more defined. He accompanied Charlie and the children to doctor's appointments, attended church functions with Margaret's community, and even helped Charlie set up a small booth at the local farmer's market to sell her baked goods. The small baking business quickly flourished. Charlie's reputation as a talented baker grew, and she began to envision a life where she could provide for her children without relying on anyone else. James's transformation didn't go unnoticed by Charlie. Though she kept her guard up, she began to see the depth of his commitment and the sincerity in his actions. He had traded his high society lifestyle for something simpler, something more meaningful. The wealth and status he once clung to seemed unimportant to him now, and his focus had shifted entirely to his children's happiness. One evening, as they finished a quiet dinner with the triplets at Margaret's house, James and Charlie sat outside on the porch, the stars bright overhead. There was a comfortable silence between them, one that hadn't existed in a long time. "I know this will never be what it once was," James said softly, "but I'm grateful for this chance to be part of their lives. It's all I ever wanted now." Charlie looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "They deserve to know their father," she replied, her voice gentle, "and I'm glad you're here for them. For their sake, I hope you stay true to this path." James nodded, understanding that her acceptance was hard-won and that he had no right to expect anything more. With the success of her baking business, Charlie decided to open a small shop of her own. Margaret and the community rallied behind her, helping to renovate a cozy space downtown. On opening day, the shop was filled with customers, friends, and well-wishers. James was there too, supporting her from the sidelines, proud of the woman she had become. The bakery quickly became a beloved spot in town, known for its warmth and delicious treats. Charlie found a sense of independence and fulfillment that she had longed for, building a life for herself and her children that was both stable and joyful. With each passing day, Charlie felt more at peace. Her journey had been filled with heartbreak and struggle, but she had found her way. The future looked bright, and she knew that she could face anything with the strength she had gained. Months later, on a warm afternoon, Charlie, James, and Margaret sat on the porch, watching the triplets play in the yard. Their laughter filled the air, a joyful sound that symbolized the resilience and hope that had carried them all forward. Charlie looked at James and Margaret, a deep sense of gratitude in her heart. They had faced incredible challenges, but together they had created a family bound by love, forgiveness, and understanding. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, Charlie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had found her path, her strength, and the life she had always dreamed of for her children. A year had passed since the day Charlie confronted James at his wedding. The town was abuzz with excitement, as Margaret's community had organized a local fair in celebration of Charlie's bakery's first anniversary. Her shop had quickly become a beloved fixture in town, and people eagerly gathered to support her. The warm, inviting atmosphere of the fair was filled with laughter and music, families enjoying the activities, and the scent of freshly baked pastries wafting from Charlie's booth. She worked with a beaming smile, grateful for the life she had built and the community that had embraced her. Margaret, ever the supportive friend, helped serve pastries and welcomed guests with her characteristic warmth. She watched Charlie proudly, her heart full of joy for the young woman she had come to see as family. James had also grown into his role as a father. He now attended every event, birthday, and milestone in the triplets' lives, having built a relationship with each of them that was genuine and loving. He had traded his high-powered job for a simpler, more fulfilling one in town, allowing him to stay close to his children and be a consistent presence in their lives. At the fair, James played with the triplets, lifting them up on his shoulders, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the festivities around them. The love in his eyes was unmistakable, and he cherished every moment he spent with them. Watching him interact with the children, Charlie felt a sense of relief. Her children would have the father they deserved, and that was all she had ever wanted. The triplets, now toddlers, were vibrant and full of life, a source of endless joy to those around them. They had inherited Charlie's resilience and determination, and their personalities began to shine as they grew. Each day, they showed a new talent, a new quirk, and their playful spirits brought light to everyone in their lives. Margaret doted on them like a grandmother, sharing stories, teaching them nursery rhymes, and watching over them as they grew. Her home had become their second home, filled with laughter, toys, and the joyful chaos that only children could bring. The love and security Charlie had fought so hard to provide for them had finally come to fruition, and it was reflected in their happiness. She knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, her family would face them together. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the fair, James approached Charlie at her booth. They shared a quiet moment, reflecting on everything they had endured. The fair's sounds faded into the background as they spoke, their words carrying the weight of shared history and mutual respect. "Charlie, I just want to thank you," James said, his voice sincere. "You gave me a second chance, not only with the kids but with myself. I've realized what truly matters in life, and I owe that to you." Charlie looked at him, a small smile on her face. "You've come a long way, James, and I'm glad for our children that they get to know this side of you. I never expected us to reach this point, but I'm grateful we did." He nodded, understanding that forgiveness was a journey, one that had led them both to a place of peace. They had found a way to coexist and support each other, bound by the love they shared for their children. As they stood together, watching the triplets run toward them with arms outstretched, Charlie realized that while the road had been hard, it had ultimately led her to where she was meant to be. And that was a life filled with love, purpose, and the strength to carry on. Later that evening, as the fair wound down, Margaret pulled Charlie aside, presenting her with a beautifully wrapped box. Charlie looked at her in surprise. Her curiosity piqued. "Open it, dear," Margaret encouraged, her eyes twinkling. Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace adorned with 3 small pendants, each one engraved with the initials of her children. Overwhelmed, Charlie looked at Margaret, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. This means so much," she whispered, clutching the necklace to her heart. Margaret smiled, resting a gentle hand on Charlie's shoulder. "You've earned every bit of happiness, Charlie. You're a wonderful mother, a loyal friend, and an inspiration to everyone around you. Never forget that." The 2 women embraced, their bond stronger than ever. Margaret's support had been a lifeline, and Charlie knew she would forever cherish her role in her journey. Together, they had faced life's challenges and emerged stronger, their friendship an unbreakable force. As the fair came to a close and the stars filled the sky, Charlie reflected on the life she had built. Her bakery was thriving, her children were happy, and she had found a supportive community and family. She had walked through fire, but she had emerged unbroken, stronger than she ever imagined. The once frightening unknown had transformed into a world of possibilities, each day a chance to create a brighter future. She looked at the triplets, their eyes filled with wonder as they pointed at the stars, and her heart swelled with love. James, too, had found redemption, a path guided by humility and the desire to be the father his children needed. They were no longer bound by bitterness or regret, but by a mutual dedication to their children's happiness. As they left the fair that night, Charlie felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but the struggles had shaped her, giving her the strength and resilience to build a better future. She knew there would still be challenges, but she was ready to face them with courage and hope. In that moment, Charlie understood that happiness wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And surrounded by her children, her friends, and the community that had become her family, she was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 year to the day after the fair that marked her shop's grand opening, Charlie found herself reflecting on how much her life had transformed. Her bakery was thriving more than ever, and her loyal customers had grown to include people from neighboring towns. The bakery was a warm, bustling hub, where patrons came not only for the treats, but for the welcoming atmosphere Charlie had carefully cultivated. To mark the special day, Margaret suggested they throw a celebration, inviting friends, family, and community members to share in the joy of the occasion. James offered to help as well, bringing the triplets along. The little ones wore matching aprons and chef hats, proudly helping their mom prepare for the event, which delighted the guests and drew smiles all around. Charlie glanced around her shop, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. She watched as her children laughed and played with customers, and her heart swelled with joy. This wasn't just a bakery. It was a testament to resilience, hope, and the love that had carried her through every challenge. As the evening wore on and the bakery filled with laughter and joy, Margaret took center stage, raising her glass in a toast to Charlie. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to the wise and beloved woman who had become a cornerstone of Charlie's life. "I'd like to propose a toast to a remarkable woman who's taught us all what it means to persevere," Margaret began, her voice filled with pride. "Charlie, you've faced more than most people ever will, yet you came through it stronger, with grace and kindness that inspires us every day. You are a wonderful mother, a talented baker, and an extraordinary friend." She looked over at James and the triplets, who sat happily at a table near the front, their eyes bright with admiration. "And to the family and friends who have become a part of your journey, let's always remember that love, courage, and community are what bring us together. Here's to Charlie, her beautiful family, and a future filled with happiness." The room erupted in applause, guests lifting their glasses as Charlie fought back tears of gratitude. She raised her glass with a trembling hand, looking out at the crowd who had become her family. "Thank you, all of you," she began, her voice choked with emotion. This past year has taught me the power of love and resilience, and I'm so blessed to have each of you in my life. I couldn't have done any of this alone." She glanced toward James, a hint of warmth in her smile. "Thank you for showing up, for being there for our children, and for helping us become the family we are today." James nodded, his expression sincere. They shared a quiet, understanding look, both aware of how far they had come. At the close of the celebration, the triplets, each eager to surprise their mother, presented her with a handmade card covered in their bright scribbles and handprints. Inside, in Margaret's neat handwriting, was a simple message. "Mommy, we love you so much. Thank you for making us happy and safe every day. You're our hero." Charlie knelt down, embracing her children as the room watched with soft smiles. She whispered her thanks, kissed each of them, and held them close, feeling as though her heart might burst with love. As the night drew to a close and the guests trickled out, Charlie stood outside the bakery watching the stars twinkle above. Margaret and James joined her, sharing in the quiet peace of the evening. Margaret placed a gentle hand on Charlie's shoulder. "You've built something truly beautiful, Charlie. This is just the beginning." James looked at her, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. "You've given our children a life filled with love and strength. I'm proud of you." Charlie turned to them both, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without either of you. You're my family, and I'm so grateful for everything you've given us." As they stood together, their bond deeper and stronger than ever, they understood that they had all grown through love, forgiveness, and resilience. As Charlie looked toward the future, she felt at peace. Life would always present its challenges, but she was ready to face them, surrounded by family and friends who loved her. She had found joy in the journey, strength in her resilience, and beauty in the life she had created. With a final look at her bakery, her dream made real, she knew that she and her family were exactly where they were meant to be, and that was more than enough. Months after the bakery's anniversary celebration, Charlie found herself reflecting on the profound changes of the past 2 years. Her journey from heartbreak to healing had been challenging, yet it had transformed her into a stronger, more compassionate person. As she sipped her morning coffee at her kitchen table, she could hear the playful laughter of the triplets from the living room, where Margaret was happily entertaining them with stories and games. In the quiet moments, Charlie marveled at how far she had come. The pain she had endured seemed distant now, replaced by a deep gratitude for the love and stability she had managed to build for her family. Her children were thriving, her business was expanding, and her circle of support was stronger than she could have ever imagined. One evening, Charlie sat down with Margaret and shared an idea that had been growing in her heart. "Margaret," she began, her voice tinged with excitement, "I've been thinking of opening a second location, somewhere close to the city where people could come for a quiet retreat, maybe with a small garden." Margaret smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Charlie. You've built something special here, and I know people would love a cozy place like that." With the triplets starting preschool, Charlie had found herself with a bit more time to dream and plan. Her ambition had rekindled, and the vision of her new shop gave her a renewed sense of purpose. It felt like a perfect next step, not only for her business but for her personal growth as well. James had grown into his role as a dedicated co-parent, fully present in the triplets' lives. His relationship with Charlie was now one of mutual respect and understanding, and he supported her dreams without reservation. When she mentioned her plans for the new bakery location, he listened intently, nodding with genuine encouragement. "That sounds amazing, Charlie," he said, a proud smile lighting up his face. "Let me know if there's any way I can help. I'd be honored to be part of it." Charlie felt a warmth toward James, grateful for his willingness to support her goals. He had indeed changed, and his growth as a father and friend had strengthened the co-parenting relationship they had worked so hard to build. Their children, surrounded by love from both parents, were happy and secure, which was all she had ever wanted for them. As the seasons changed and the triplets grew, the day of their preschool graduation arrived. Charlie and James stood together in the small auditorium, their eyes filled with pride as they watched their children walk confidently across the stage, smiling at their parents in the audience. In that moment, Charlie felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She had come so far, endured so much, and had given her children a foundation built on love, resilience, and hope. James reached over, giving her hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey that had brought them to this point. After the ceremony, they celebrated with Margaret, who had been a constant presence, her unwavering support invaluable to the family. Her wisdom and love had bridged the gap between hardship and healing, and both Charlie and James felt profoundly grateful for the role she had played in their lives. A few months later, the day finally arrived for the grand opening of Charlie's second bakery. The new shop, nestled on a quiet street at the edge of the city, featured an outdoor seating area adorned with flowers and a small garden that had become a sanctuary for her patrons. The opening was a joyful success, filled with friends, customers, and supportive members of the community who had watched Charlie's journey from the beginning. Margaret and the triplets were there, handing out small, hand-tied bouquets of herbs and flowers to each guest. James helped set up the final decorations, his pride in Charlie evident as he watched her greet guests and share the fruits of her labor. He admired her courage and resilience, knowing the strength it had taken her to reach this point. As the evening grew, he approached her with a warm smile. "You've done it, Charlie. You've created something truly beautiful," he said, his voice filled with respect. Charlie smiled, the glow of accomplishment lighting her face. "Thank you, James. I couldn't have done it without everyone's support." That night, after everyone had left and the bakery was quiet, Charlie stood alone in the small garden, looking up at the stars. She felt a profound peace, a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing she had turned her dreams into reality. The past few years had been a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and forgiveness. James joined her for a moment of silence, the two of them standing side by side. There were no words needed, only a mutual understanding of the journey they had taken together, the challenges they had overcome, and the family they had built. "I know things didn't turn out the way we once imagined," James said softly, "but I think we ended up exactly where we were supposed to be." Charlie nodded, her heart full. "Yes, we did, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." They shared a quiet smile before turning back toward the bakery, ready to face whatever the future held. Together, they had forged a family grounded in love, and that was a legacy neither of them would ever take for granted. In the following years, Charlie's bakeries became treasured spots within the community, symbolizing resilience and warmth. The triplets flourished, surrounded by love from both parents and their extended family. Margaret continued to play a central role in their lives, her home a haven where laughter and love abounded. The family's journey was far from perfect, but it was real, rooted in hard-won forgiveness and understanding. They had each grown in ways they hadn't expected, learning the power of compassion, resilience, and community. And as Charlie looked back on the path that had brought her here, she knew that every challenge had led her to this life filled with meaning, joy, and the boundless love of family. She had found her peace, and she would carry it with her always. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, redemption, and the power of family, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you heartfelt stories of love and hope. Don't miss out on our next inspiring tale. Click subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next story. Thank you for being part of our community.